Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, and welcome back to the second day of the conference. My name is Joji Waits, the Head of Flight Safety at the British Airline Pilots Association. I'm delighted to see that so many of you have returned. Hopefully this means we didn't scare you too much yesterday. For those unable to join us yesterday, the recordings of both sessions, together with the presentations, will be published on the BALPA Safety Conference website, so you can digest at your own leisure. We have lots of ground to cover today, 5 presentation slots with 7 speakers, so I'll keep the introduction brief. Yesterday I established a theoretical foundation, which hopefully has helped you appreciate the rationale and benefits in taking a system safety approach and the critical importance of genuine learning from all sources available to you. Today, we will provide you with more practical examples of how the theory has been applied in real-world situations and how it has led to improvements in how people engage with safety, ultimately leading to better safety outcomes. This will then be followed by a discussion on the regulatory view as provided by the UK Civil Aviation Authority and Health and Safety Executive. Just a quick reminder to submit your questions as we go along today via the Q&A function. These questions will be collated and covered in the panel session at the end of the day. We will be taking a short break after the third presentation, which will be around 3:20-ish UK time. So without further ado, on to the main event. The first presentation today is a double act from the USA, a pilot and union representative from American Airlines, and one of the FAA inspectors responsible for the oversight of American. It's my pleasure to introduce Captain James Kwasny and Sean Kerrick. James commands the Boeing 737 for American Airlines at the Dallas-Fort Worth domicile. He's also the Allied Pilots Association representative to the LOSA and Learning and Improvement Team Proactive Safety Efforts at American. James has been an ardent proactive safety advocate since 2009, beginning in LOSA and transitioning to Safety 2 theories and applications. James concluded a 28-year US Air Force career in 2019, where he began his safety journey and experience while flying the KC-10 Extender and C-5 Galaxy aircraft. James resides in Fort Worth with his family. Sean has been an FAA Aviation Safety Inspector since 2011 and is currently the Assistant Principal Operations Inspector at American Airlines Certification Management Office. Prior to joining the FAA, he commanded the Boeing 737 as well at Alaska Airlines for 12 years, and was a US Air Force commander on several aircraft for 9 years prior to that. So, with many thanks, first over to James.
Good morning, Joji and James. Can you all hear me okay?
Yep, I can hear you fine, thanks.
Great, thanks, gentlemen. Good morning, good day to everyone around the world that's tuning in to the presentation. And we'd like to say from American Airlines in Dallas, Texas, good morning. And thank you for having us. It's a real honor to be able to come and talk with such a distinguished guest list. And we're honored to share what we've done to date and tell a little bit about our story. I'd like to just begin with where I'm going to go today. I want to change it up a little bit after yesterday. I'm going to do a very short introduction, what we've done to date, our accomplishments that we're proud of. I'm happy to talk about our failures if anyone would like. I don't know that I built any slides to that effect. But then I want to spend more of my time on the presentation today talking about the results, because I want you all to see where we've gotten and be able to make your own assessment if you think there's value in this entire process, because this is it's a journey. And I think it's in our title here because it's been a journey at American Airlines. We've been working on it full time, almost for 3 years. We've had tremendous support, and we're still just beginning the journey, I would say, on our end at American Airlines. So that's my goal for the discussion today. Before we get started, I do need to say just a couple thanks. Our leadership has been extremely supportive of us. Management and our Pilot Association leadership have been extremely supportive of us. In fact, they started the effort. They heard Eric Kalnagel speak almost 4 years ago now at a Flight Safety Foundation conference, and it struck them, and they tasked me to look into this process and start deciding if there was value in trying to implement Safety 2. at American Airlines. So they've been very helpful. My counterpart for the last 3 years has been Captain Guy Mouton. He's just recently returned to line flying in the 787 here in Dallas Fort Worth. He was also instrumental in kicking this program off with me. So I'd like to say a quick shout out to Guy, and those of them that have worked with him over the years know what a gentleman he is and how he's helped establish the program. Eric, like I said, has been very helpful for us from day one. Including Guy and I took a trip to Copenhagen 3 years ago now to sit with Eric and share with him our vision, how we thought this was going to go. And Eric gave us a slight course correction is probably the nicest way to say it. He gave us a vector, different than possibly where we thought we were going. So that was good. We have some outstanding partnerships currently with both NASA, and you all heard from John Holbrook yesterday, and they help us analyze our data. And help us make sense of some of the things that we struggle with on our side with this new type of data. And then the Flight Safety Foundation also has been a great partner of ours. We've been talking with them for years now, and they help us. They help us figure out a structure and where we're trying to go with this whole process, and we've really enjoyed our partnership with them. And then finally, as I hinted at the beginning, and you can see here on my title slide, the Allied Pilots Association is the pilots association for American Airlines, 15,000 pilots. And we are, I actually am the APA representative to the process, but we have a very strong connection between our association with everything safety and American Airlines. American Airlines and the association figured out many, many years ago that it's best to do all these efforts in partnership. So we do. So I'm actually from the union side, from the association side, and I get to work on this project and then make sure we're also representing the pilot's interest, which is so important for buy-in eventually as we go to implement the program, and make sure that the pilots are represented in all this. So, and then finally, our regulator, the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration. Many airlines see them as a challenge to work with. We have an outstanding relationship with our POI and our CMO. We invite them to all the meetings. They see all this data that we see raw, and you'll hear Sean speak after I'm done today. I'm going to take just over half the time, and then Sean's going to get to give you his view. And the important thing here is that we share the data with them daily. We don't filter it. We don't decide what they get to see. They see it, the good and the bad, and they sit usually quietly and just want to see how we are responding to it and what we're going to do with it. But they've been great partners for us. So on that leg, and then just a shout out to yesterday's presentation and how outstanding it was, to set the theoretical side. I just wanted to thank Eric and Stephen, everyone, John, Robert. I thought they did an outstanding job of setting the stage for what Safety 2 is as we've gone down this journey. So after my introductions, how do we improve safety? This was the beginning of the question for us, going back to Eric's table here between Safety 1 and Safety 2. I'm going to go very quickly through this because you've got this all yesterday from different levels. But you have to remember that the thing that is the easiest sell for us in the airline pilot world is that the human is viewed as a resource versus a liability in Safety 2. So you can imagine to the typical line pilot, that's a very easy sell. They want to hear that message, and they're like, that sounds great. It's not always going to be about pilot error. Every problem we see and every issue we see, we're not going to always end up blaming it on the pilot and say it's pilot error, which has been historically, we know, 80% of all of our issues. Instead, we're going to say the pilot's the ultimate resource and the ultimate piece of flexibility in the system and resilience. So let's honor that, and let's try to expound on that. So that's a pretty easy sell for us. We know that it's not Safety 1 versus Safety 2. John Holbrook talked about this yesterday. For us, it's Safety 1 and Safety 2. We're not reducing any of our Safety 1 efforts along these lines. All we're doing is implementing Safety 2 as an additional data stream into our current SMS process. We started with this question. I think most people should. This is the best quote that at American Airlines we decided on as a team that we agreed about. We like this. The word capacity is a little awkward for pilots, only in that I don't know that we talk about capacity in the cockpit. We we slightly altered that word. And for us, the core of our entire effort here in Safety 2 is going to be resilience. So thanks to Sydney for his outstanding works on this. We read a lot of his and Eric's works to get here. So the core of our lit.
Sorry,
Yes.
I think you're sharing your screen. Is there a, were you meant to be doing that at this stage?
Oh, goodness. Oh, yeah. Sorry. I guess I didn't do that, did I? Thanks. Let me slow down there. Is that better? Thanks, James. Are you seeing it?
Got it now. Yeah, perfect. Thanks for that.
Sorry about that. So yeah, as we go ahead, we built a model for our lit team, which is our learning and improvement team, and our model starts with resilience. We want to have the most resilient group we can, the largest amount of resilience in our operation. We want our pilots to demonstrate resilience. We've identified 4 potentials around the resilience core. These are altered slightly from Eric's. He challenged us to create our own language, and we did. So we talked about it, and we decided we were comfortable changing a couple of these, and we came up with learn, plan, adapt, and coordinate. The problem with these potentials is they're large and they're difficult to measure. And that's what we're trying to demonstrate here. So we had to get to some level that was actually measurable in some finite level of behaviors we're trying to look at and see what we can see. And for that, we came up more with proficiencies as another level below potentials that can actually be measured. And for each of the 4 potentials, we've developed proficiencies, which are actually demonstrations of resilient behavior to see. This is a list of our proficiencies. We just finalized these proficiencies late in 2020. We worked for probably 2.5 years to really get comfortable with where we ended up with these proficiencies. These are example of the 4 learned proficiencies. The most frequent one we see out there is the pilots when they share knowledge. That's the most frequent of the learned proficiencies we see. Plan proficiencies are here. I'm not going to go into them all. We have definitions for all these, much more finite, specific definitions for all these that we train our team in exactly what all these mean for each of the different potentials. Adapt has the most proficiencies, as you can see here, which kind of makes sense in our world. We do a lot of adaptation to the original plan. And then coordinate. And coordinate is the most prevalent proficiency by far as we go ahead. And we really want to, we'll concentrate on this a little bit as we go forward for the rest of the presentation is on the coordinate. So these are our 27 proficiencies. We have these as basis for all the resilient behavior we see, and we think that we can code almost all the resilient behavior we see into one of these 27 proficiencies. This is how our model ended up as we completed it. We see the the potentials leading in and out of resilience. That flow goes both ways. And then we wanted to acknowledge that leadership and communication are also very important in the flight deck. And they're in there, and they're in that blue, light blue medium in the background, which also provides a pathway to move between potentials without always having to go through resiliency. So what have we done to date? We've collected some data to validate the coding language and the language we try to develop, and we've been through at least 12 different versions of that language along the way, I can tell you, as we keep refining it. We collected about almost 100 flight observations, which are very similar to LOSA observations where we ride along, and the observers are trained to collect resilient behavior from the flight deck and watch our crews do and demonstrate resiliency, and they record it. For us, resiliency is going above and beyond standard operating procedure. So if our procedures say that we have to brief the flight attendants before every flight, doing a flight attendant briefing is not resilient behavior. But doing an exceptional flight attendant briefing, well above and beyond the minimum and the required items in the briefing, where you go back and you sit down with them and you have a discussion and build a team and maybe share the route of flight on the iPad and show them where the weather is supposed to be at what points in flight where there may be turbulence, that's not required. So doing those types of steps might show resilient behavior because they've gone significantly above and beyond the typical required briefing. We've also we also generate data from, we call them structured interviews. They're really guided conversations. We sit down with line pilots, again, anonymous, de-identified, and we just ask a series of questions about what's going on out there and what they're seeing, and tell us about a time that, and we've got some outstanding data feeds coming in that way. And our leadership, the senior leadership at American's really enjoying that data stream because it's quicker, it's more responsive to requests they have if they have a focus area. Right now, we're talking about COVID, obviously, quite a bit, and we're talking about proficiency that the pilots are having in proficiency problems and what problems those are causing for them out on the line when they go out and start flying, maybe after a 6 or 9 month break away from flying. And we're learning things that, quite honestly, management probably wouldn't have learned otherwise. So let's start showing some of the data. That's what I wanted to get into, as I told you in the introduction. Across all the potentials, this is how the breakout of the prevalence rate of what proficiencies and potentials were actually collected. We can see learn's very low. It's on the low end. And that maybe worried us a little bit at first, but as we talked about it, we said, you know, airline pilots maybe aren't the best learners. Naturally, we may have to try to work on this. And this is why Learn is in our team name in the learning improvement team. And it's why Learn is at the top center of our model, because we see learning as the greatest opportunity for us to improve our safety at American Airlines. We want our pilots to become better learners. So we're trying to learn all we can about this facet of growth. And then we're going to try to share this back down to the line. And we're struggling with it. I mean, we can see here that it shows. Now, a quick disclaimer, it's not as easy as saying that these are all equal and we see significantly more coordinate. You have to remember, on certain flights, there's not as much opportunity to demonstrate resilient behavior because the flight might go pretty darn well. The plan might have been outstanding before the flight even began, and therefore the crew didn't have to show a lot of resilience because everything went fairly well. And just doing the procedural flow and the processes at our airline, everything went amazingly well. And then we know there's other flights where you have an opportunity to shine, where you're going to be challenged, whether it's the plan wasn't good, there's some significant external pressures get introduced to the situation that you didn't plan for, that you have to adapt to. There's more opportunity on some flights to show more potentials. So we have to remember it's not as easy as so analyzing the data can be a real challenge, because we don't want to say we want to take away some coordinate and build up learn, because that is not what we want at all. We are happy that coordinate is so high on this one because we believe in American Airlines and we put it in our model. Remember, in the light blue background, communicate is one of the most important things that we feel like our crews need to do to be successful. So to get there, we want coordinate to be as high as it is, and we're happy with this. We broke it out by getting all the way down to the proficiency level now for each of the 4 potentials. I'm going to spend a lot of time on this slide. You will see that in Learn. It's interesting that pilots are 3 times as likely to share knowledge as to seek knowledge. And this didn't really surprise us, knowing airline pilots, at least in the United States and American Airlines. I won't make a broad brush assessment of all airline pilots, but you know, in America, yeah, I think our pilots are not always feeling like they need to seek knowledge. But what does seek and share knowledge look like to us? Give a quick example. If I'm going to fly today and the first leg of my trip is from Dallas Fort Worth to Cleveland, and I know I have not been to Cleveland in 5 years as a pilot, and I sit down in the flight deck and I look at my first officer, and probably some of the first words after we get through the pleasantries of meeting each other are going to be me letting him know that I have not been to Cleveland in 5 years. And I want him to know that. I want to get that out there early. That's resilient behavior, right? Setting it out there on the table very early. And I would say that, hey, John, I haven't been to Cleveland in 5 years. Now, what do I want to hear? I would love to hear him say, well, James, no problem. I've been going there all month. It's no big deal. I'll tell you everything you need to know in cruise. It's not, there's 2 gotchas. We'll talk about them at cruise. That is an example of seeking knowledge from me, right? I was seeking knowledge, saying, hey, I need help. Can you fill in the gaps in my bucket? And then him sharing knowledge possibly at cruise when he might pull out the iPad and show me the couple gotchas they've had earlier in the month when they've been going there. And we see this routinely. This is normal pilot behavior, right? And we see it. Now, it's never been documented because if you ask pilots, they're going to always say what? They're going to say, that's our job. That's what we do. And we have a vested interest, right? We have a very, very vested interest in keeping the flight as safe as we can because we're at the front end of the stick at the pointy end there. So we are we're very vested, players, and we understand that. But that doesn't have to happen. That conversation does not have to happen. And 99.9% of the time, everything would go fine if that conversation never happened. Even if the first officer didn't know the captain had been there for 5 years, he might figure it out by the time they get to the gate in Cleveland when he's like, man, that guy acted like he's never been here. It probably would sneak out in some subtle things. In plan, you can see the top 2 proficiencies are gathering information and updating changes to the plan. They're actually equal, you'll see later. Adapting, the top 2 proficiencies are also tied, which is addressing unanticipated new pressure, which we have to do very frequently in flying, we all know, and then intervening for an unwanted condition, which is interesting that that's so high. But there's so many times that things get introduced into our flight deck that we have to deal with that aren't wanted. And many of them start with automation. You can see right there in the next one. So finally, coordinate, by far our biggest proficiencies. You can see there, affirming new information supports the plan. This is where you gather more information, and then you want to put it and kind of place it against your plan that you have in place and say, now that we know that we have a tailwind, are we still comfortable landing on that runway? Or are we going to ask for a different runway? Are we going to have to rerun our landing data to make sure we're safe to land now that we have a tailwind? Should we look at our flap, our planned flap configuration for landing? All those things that we do again on a daily basis. And many of us are like, that's our job. It is our job, but we need to understand how we do it and why we do it well, so that maybe we can bring it back into training. So that's our goal with this process. We break them out by phase of flight. I'm going to spend a lot of time on this chart. This is one of the first charts we created, but it does show some interesting things. We can see that where adapting is high, that coordinate is high. And that makes sense to us. And it gave us a little bit of a sanity check and a validation of the data that it makes sense to us, because in pre-flight and taxi out, where we have 8% adapt potentials collected, we know that when we adapt the plan, we have to coordinate the new plan, whether it's with dispatch, whether it's with ATC, whether it's with just the other pilot or the flight attendants or whomever, or the passengers. When the plan changes, most times it has to be coordinated. So that was a very logical connection for us, and it made sense, and it helped. It made us happy to see that. We can also see that learn is highest in the 2 phases of flight that probably have the most time and the most opportunity to talk about things, because you're not just continually doing tasks. So pre-flight and cruise, we'll see that our learn potential is the highest. And that also made sense to us and made us happy to see that we had those relationships. We broke out the proficiencies, all 27 of them here, by prevalence. It's a little bit of an eye chart, and I don't want you to spend a lot of time on this, but this helped us start to decide, and in relative level of importance, where the different proficiencies were being recorded. And it was interesting to us to see that. But the one thing you can see is the very first learn proficiency is 1/3 of the way down this chart in sharing knowledge, only 70 instances of it across all of the observations we did. And you can see it's pretty far below, and there's been multiple instances of all the other potentials before we get to the first learn one. And then after that, the second learn one is not almost to the very bottom of the chart. So that struck us, and we didn't lose that. Now, maybe our pilots are so comfortable with our system and our processes that we don't need to do a lot of seeking knowledge and debriefing, but we're not as confident of that. We think we could probably improve those numbers and get those numbers up. And yesterday, Robert kind of made a hint at it, that it's one of our ultimate goals at American Airlines is we would like to expand and get into some kind of effective debrief. And I can tell you, we're probably not going to use the word debrief because of some connotations of that word, but we're working very hard right now to understand the best opportunity for debrief, so that we could try to present it into our system going forward. And have our pilots have that opportunity to learn from each other. because we have such a wealth of knowledge between our two pilots on a daily basis. So this chart drives us to where to do some more analysis, which is interesting for us. You can clearly see that the top two coordinate proficiencies are by far the leaders in the overall numbers here of the data that we collected. Going back to our model, and one thing we saw from the beginning, and I hinted at it with the adapt and coordinate connection, is there's linkages between these potentials. And what we mean by that is sometimes when one potential happens, it's logical that there's going to be another one behind it. And from day one, when we started collecting the data, we thought there was value in this. So we have been collecting these linkages, and these linkages can be as simple as from one proficiency to another, like we're drawing here simply with the arrows. It can be that one potential right back to itself. And we've seen that in numerous instances. I think our longest chain of linkages is 6 we've seen on a flight where we started with one potential, and then we saw 6 additional potentials that were all linked back to the very first one. We're struggling with analyzing this data. We have the data. We're trying to figure out the real value in this data. This is something we're working with our friends at NASA with. They're trying to help us understand that better to make sure that we're making sense of it. We still know there's value in it. We're going to continue collecting it. I can tell you that to date, we haven't made a great connection yet on what this means to us. These are the linkages right here. I'm not going to spend much time on this to spelling it out, but just showing you that we have this data, we've looked at it, we've tried a couple different times to get into it deeply and make sense, and we're still struggling with that. If anyone out there has great ideas, we'd love to hear from you after this conference today. But probably the most exciting area and the one piece of data that we found, and I'll share this with the group, is that we found some connections with our captain and first officers, depending if they're the pilot flying or the pilot monitoring. And what I mean by that is we're sensing how many potentials were observed depending on who was the actual player. And then we call it usually the first actor a lot of times. The first actor is the individual in the flight deck that's going to get credit for starting that resilient behavior. So if somebody starts a conversation about, if the captain in my earlier example says to the first officer, I haven't been to Cleveland for 5 years, that's resilient behavior by the captain, and that would be seeking knowledge. So we would ask him to, we would record it that way as captain. If he was the pilot flying, and then he gets to be the first actor, we call it, for that proficiency. For all of our proficiencies we log, who is the first actor. We do have some boths, although that's a little bit of a struggle. We're trying to get away from the both because almost always you can assess it to one of the two individuals in the flight deck. Anyway, so for our data stream and our 96 observations, luckily we had a perfectly even distribution of 50-50 for who was flying, captain and first officer. We generally just alternate legs at American Airlines is pretty standard. Although I will tell you, it's also fairly standard that the captain flies the very first leg of a new sequence or a new pairing. So they usually start. And most first officers, as we've done discussions with them, will tell us they like it because they want the captain to fly the first leg because they want to see how he flies and feed off of that, and maybe a little bit of what we call the chameleon effect, where they can mimic that for the rest of the trip when they see how the captain sets the standard. So how important is that first leg when the captain chooses to fly the first leg, that he sets the standard that he wants for the 3 or 4 day trip and goes out, and that's pretty strong here. So we measured these, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time. We have spent a lot of time talking about these charts and trying to make sense of them because this is not completely logical to us. This goes against our feelings a lot of times of what we thought we knew about what happens in our flight decks. But the top left chart is all potentials, captain and FO is either PF or PM. Now, one problem at American Airlines is only the captain taxis. So we have to account for that statistically. So anything that occurs on the ground, either you're taxiing out or taxiing in or at the gate in pre-flight, all are going to be captain as pilot flying. We coded all of those all of those exactly the same throughout the entire data set. And we knew that, going in. So what we did was we took out all ground potentials, and that's the chart in the top right. And these are only airborne or from takeoff until landing, takeoff through landing potentials with PF and PM duties, and trying to see that. And the only thing I'll point out here on this chart on the top right is that when the captain is pilot flying, that seems to be the most resilient position. And that might make sense. And when the FO is pilot monitoring, it's his highest position, crew position in the actual workload breakout. But when the captain is pilot monitoring in the second vertical bar there, you can see that right here, you can see that the first officer, when he's pilot flying, that's the lowest. That's the lowest crew complement that shows us proficiencies. And then if you really think about it, when the first officer is pilot flying, the captain is pilot monitoring, that worries us a little bit in this crew complement right here, because these are the lowest for both of the positions. Not dramatically lower, but low enough that we see it. So we've gone back and tried to validate this data a couple different ways. And I can tell you we're completing a study, in fact, as we speak, and I'll share this in the future, we went back to some of our LOSA data. And we have some LOSA data that talks about leadership. And we're trying to make a connection between leadership of our captains, whether they're PF or PM. And I can tell you it shows this data almost the same, that when our captains become pilot monitoring, they're demonstrating significantly less leadership. And that's worrisome to us. And we all know that we have pilot monitoring issues, probably is the nicest way to say it, in most modern airline flight decks. And what we're all trying to do right now is just understand it better so that we can bring it back to the line pilot and share it with them and say, here's what we've seen, folks. And we just want you to know what we've seen so that maybe we can get better at it. That's really the gist of our investigation and our research at this point in time. So we're digging. We don't have the right answer here. I do think the LOSA data right now with the leadership angle is providing us an interesting angle into this scenario. And like I hinted at in the beginning of the presentation about doing the guided discussions, we call them shop talk in our airline. They're called shop talks, where we do the guided discussions with crews and guided conversations. We are asking a lot of questions about PF versus PM because we want to hear what the line pilot has to say and why they think they're more effective as either PF or PM in the flight deck. And we've got some fascinating data on that already. Most pilots, I will tell you, off the top of their head, will tell you that they are more effective as PM because they can sit back and watch the other pilot and maybe provide a safety barrier to the entire operation. The problem is the data doesn't support that. So it's an interesting combination. And as always in American, we'd love to have a conversation with anyone that has any different insights to these combination to us, because we're fascinated by this, and we're going down this path of trying to understand it better because we want to learn. So going back to the prevalence chart that we showed you earlier for the proficiencies, we've also broken it out by who's actually in what position. That builds up the total number for each of the bars for each of the 27 proficiencies. Again, this is a complete eye chart, and I don't want you to just concentrate on it. I just want you to know that we've gone down to this level, and this has helped us start to look at certain areas of our operation, because this chart very clearly shows you that we have some issues in a couple areas. American Airlines has a distinct culture. I think every airline has a distinct culture in the flight deck. I've only flown in airline world at American Airlines, but I can tell you from dealing with other airlines and talking to peers that have flown at other airlines, American Airlines is usually regarded as a pretty captain-centric airline, which for us means the captain is, a lot of our procedures and processes are written that the captain does them. The captain only will do this. The captain only will do this. Well, that sets a culture, and that makes a culture across the entire operation that comes out in different ways. And this might be where it's coming out. So we're going to assess this over the next year and provide some recommendations back to our leadership about possible procedure and policy changes if there's some things we could do to look at that culture. Is that the culture we want? And if it is, then that's okay. But if it's not the culture we want, maybe some ideas of how we could change that. So this has been a fascinating chart right here for us, and it's led us down to a lot of different discussions and a lot of different attempts at data gathering. We focused the data gathering in our shop talks to try to answer this question a little bit better, and it's helping us. We don't have enough data yet to make definitive statements, but we're getting there slowly. So how's the data used? So who's our customer? I just want to hit on that very briefly, and then I'm going to wrap it up and hand it off to Mr. Sean Carrick. How's the data being used? Our customers, who are our customers? Our customers for us, just like LOSA, our number one customer is always the line pilot. We feel like it's the guy flying the line every day. If we're not making their job better, everything we're doing is not worth it. So we always go into every day of our work with that in the back of our head, hopefully, that we're working for that individual that's leaving their family to go out and fly the airplanes, hopefully safely, and get the job done. So that's our ultimate customer. We all know that. We always go back to that. Second customer is probably our training department. In the US, we have some new, 2 new advisory circulars that have come out in the last year. I think Sean's going to hit on this a little bit, which is the captain leadership and mentoring. We have 2 new advisory circulars that are mandatory that airlines provide captain leadership and mentoring training, which we've never done in the past, or at least not to this level, where it's actually structured and defined and I guess regulated by the FAA in the future on how we're going to do that. We have fed a lot of this data into the development of that course. We will continue to provide data into that course so that we have an excellent data stream and an excellent location to share this data with our captains and hopefully everyone. We also have been providing data to our human factors courses that every pilot sees, during recurrent. And that's been an outstanding a stream for us to get to our line pilots and share with them what we're learning. And then finally is our SMS process, is our last customer. And that's as simple as another data stream is probably the easiest way to say it for us. Just like LOSA, just like FOQA, and just like ASAP, we see our LIT program becoming an additional data stream into the process. And there's times when LIT is going to be the best data stream to look at an issue and try to learn what's going on and why things are happening or not happening as we like them. There's times when LIT will not be the best data stream, and we acknowledge that. And that's the same with LOSA, FOQA, and ASAP. There's times that one data stream is much better suited to answer the question, and other times where it's really not the right data stream, and you got to look somewhere else. One example of that in our SMS process that we're working on, in fact, Sean and I work on this working group every 2 weeks. We have a meeting this afternoon, in fact, is where we've been doing a fairly intensive study the last 6 months about our go-around decision-making at American Airlines. In short, as you can imagine, we're probably not satisfied with our go-around decision-making rates that we see, and we want to improve it, and we want to see how to do it, but we want to do it the right way. We want to do it data-driven. So the LIT group has provided a lot of this data about the PF and PM, and we're analyzing go-rounds and we're analyzing unstable approaches that we've seen that have gone around and haven't gone around, and trying to decide if we can make any connections and learn stuff. And this PF PM position keeps coming up and showing us, for some reason, our pilots monitoring that crew position, whether both seats at times, left seat and right seat, when they're pilot monitoring, are not doing their duties the way we want them to. And we're trying to learn why that is, because I think if we could nip that and learn about that and then get that back into training and maybe some policy and procedure changes, we could have the real effect we're hoping for. So that's probably our last example I want to give. As far as on the screen here, you can see in the top left, we've done a series of, I think we're up to 8 articles now in our normal monthly safety magazines. Our team members have written about learn, plan, adapt, coordinate. They've written about linkages. They've written about everything with LIT on where we're at today, about our language and our coding and what we do. Actually, you can see here in the top left, talking about learn. Nick Peterson used the example that John Holbrook talked about yesterday with Luca in the EVA suit. He used that as a background for his. We've done some exercises with the NASA team about that instance, and Nick was pretty well versed in it. So he used that as his storyline to talk about Learn. There's the 2 advisory circulars up here on the screen, and then that's our SMS process. The last thing I'll say is we've written a white paper. It's available on Skybrary. If everyone would like, I can put the link to it, or you can get to it on Skybrary, probably if you just Googled or search for LOSA or for LIT, I'm sorry, LIT, or American Airlines is probably some of the only Skybrary articles. We've written a white paper. It's out there from our first probably almost 2 years on the journey, the successes and failures we had. And we've begun writing our second white paper, which is going to document this language that we've created and validated. And we'll have a little bit of our analysis of this initial round of data. We hope to have that white paper out and available in 2021, possibly late summer 21, although this year has been like nothing else. So that's on our docket for 2021, just for everyone out there. But I'm going to cut it off there. I want to share and let Sean have some time and let him talk about his relationship with our safety team and what they get to see and get involved with, and their opinion, quite honestly. Joji and James asked me from the very beginning, do you think that one of our regulators would come on and talk about their opinion and their impressions, and that's tough for them to do that, but how they've seen our LIT process go. And I said, I know Sean would. So I'm going to hand it over to Sean Carrick. We appreciate the opportunity to present. We'll be back for questions this afternoon, and I'm always available. My contact info is in a lot of different places, and James and Joji can get it for you. If you'd like to reach out directly, we'll be happy to talk with any of you. So thank you, and have a great day, and I'll hand it over to Sean.
Hello, everybody. Let me get up my slide here. Okay, let's see here. So thanks, Quaz, for welcoming me on board. So just before I launch into this, and this ties on a little bit to what Quaz was talking about in the leadership command and mentoring, I just wanted to touch on that. But as the regulator, it's been interesting to watch the transition, sort of a more traditional environment from us, of where we were the enforcer, right? And we would look for deviations from regulations and then take action that could have career consequences, financial consequences, certificate actions, that type of thing. And to see the transition that's taken place has been amazing, and that it really is about collaboration, collaborative behaviors. So by having that sort of transparent, collaborative behavior with the certificate holder and with the pilots, we're able to do our job better, right? The general idea is that folks they want to do the right thing, and that we're human beings and we make mistakes. So rather than spending your money paying civil penalties, let's spend our money identifying how we can do better and make it safer and work together. So it has been very rewarding working with American Airlines and with Quaz and the union, and doing some really great things. And Burbank is one of the stories that excites me too, and maybe we'll talk about that later today. But along the theory of the collaborative type behaviors, that goes from the top to the bottom. And so part of what we're implementing in the FAA is a requirement for leadership command and mentoring training that American has already been doing, and we just continue to grow on. It's all about collaboration. So here's the guidance. I know you guys will get the slides, but if you want to see where all the guidance is for these training programs, it will be in the slides for you. But the first piece for the leadership command, the ground training portion, is to get some of the basic instruction, right? Defining leadership. What is it? And again, there's no necessarily right answer. The air carrier plays a role in that. Whether it's proactive, reactive, different attributes of leadership, right? Are we looking for accountability, honesty, professionalism? And we like them to talk about roles and styles of leadership. We all sort of have, I guess, our default styles of leadership, but those are not always most effective in different scenarios, right? Depending on who the receiver is. So being aware of what your default style is, being aware of other styles available to you to help get the job done. We definitely want to make sure that the pilots in command are aware of their authority, their regulatory responsibilities, and what the air carrier expects of them. What are the policy and procedures? And of course, what we were looking for in leaders is for adherence to the SOPs, right? When we have accidents that have transpired, they're usually because of some sort of drift away from SOPs. So we're looking for leadership to hold people accountable for that. And then just giving them different skills for decision making and critical thinking. Along with the interactive type, I guess, theme of this is that we're expecting facilitated discussions to take place during this training. So Quaz talked a little bit about briefings and going above and beyond on your briefings, and then debriefings too. Debriefings don't happen as a regular course of action, but they're great opportunities to stress the things that went really well, right? And to look at ways to do things different, to have that immediate feedback. So we also want to have decision-making exercises be part of these facilitated discussions. Give the participants problems to work through that are problems that they might encounter out on the line. And then as part of that interactive, talking about, for instance, the different leadership styles we talked about, ask the folks that are participating, hey, what are examples of positive and negative leadership experiences? Again, the same approach may be viewed as good by some recipients of that, and others may view it in a negative way. So it's a real opportunity to learn how to better approach problems or challenges in a positive way that will be received positively by your audience and accomplish what you're trying to do. The same for professional and unprofessional conduct, right? Look for examples, have discussions, facilitated discussions to try and to vet that out about the best way to conduct yourself out there. And then how do we reinforce and how do we correct, right? So we always want to, along the positive lines, let's acknowledge the things that we're doing right out there. Let's reinforce the adherence to SOPs or above and beyond briefings. And then how do we correct people, right? How do we make sure that if we're starting to have some variance from what the expectation is, right? How do we get folks back on track? And again, these are all facilitated discussions. These are not one size fits all, but we want to have people start thinking about this. So when they get out there on the line, that they have some of those skills and some of that learning has taken place so they can put it into practice. And along those same lines, we look for those skills to be used in flight training, whether it's initial training where we set up scenarios where we're going to have to use leadership and command skills, or even the recurrent training, right? Let's look at that stuff, that information that's been gathered out there on the line. There's a lot that's happened this year, right? We've had a lot of challenges for us, whether it be COVID or politics or whatever. Those things come into our flight decks, right? So how do we manage that? Security issues, right? And so let's take the things that are happening out there today and let's introduce them into our training. Let's let everyone have those experiences and become better pilots and better learn how to handle things. And then, what goes in hand with the leadership command is in the mentoring too. So we're looking for the air carrier to have training programs to help, create mentors. How do you define a mentor? What is a mentor in your airline? What are the objectives? And generally speaking, of course, we're trying to get better pilots out there. We're trying to have a safer operation, right? But we're looking for the air carrier to define that for us. And then, what is their role out there? What is it you really want the mentor to do when they're out there? And then we have to talk a little bit too about the boundaries, right? So what do you want that relationship to look like? What kind of communication is protected? What kind of communication isn't protected? Folks shouldn't be guessing out there. So this is a collaborative process. Again, we want to have transparent communication. That's what safety is all about. But we also have to kind of have some guidelines so we understand what we can share and what we can't. And then as far as communication considerations, right? If you're mentoring, it's not unusual if you give lots of feedback that can be construed as negative, right? So we want to make sure that we give folks the awareness of the ideas that they're sharing or the help that they're providing, that it's received in a positive manner, right? So we have a good safety outcome from that. And again, as far as the interaction, we're looking for those practical exercises, right? And those can be taken from real life or ones that they know touch on subjects that are coming up. But just examples of professionalism. So it can be simple ones, such as you have a pilot that gives a PA about some upcoming turbulence that maybe alarms some of the passengers or the flight attendants. Addressing a way maybe to give that information in a way that doesn't cause alarm. And then interpersonal problems. Again, how do you resolve that? If you're someone's mentor and your mentee says, "Look, I flew with this other fella, and I had a lot of issues with him," and to how to resolve that in a professional way, right? We want to have that good communication, those good relationships. We don't want to say disparaging things about each other, but we have to learn how to navigate that. Maybe even facilitate a discussion between the mentee and this other PIC, for instance, where there were problems, to have a positive resolution. And then all of this stuff comes into CRM, right, into crew resource management. So it's very important that you have these leadership and command skills in order to be an effective crew resource manager, right? So we require sort of that leadership and command training to happen before we get into crew resource management. So that's really all I have on this. I have a question slide with contact, but I know we'll have questions later today. But I just want to reemphasize the collaboration that's taken place is just amazing. It's so fun getting to work with the union, with the certificate holder, to be part of all their meetings, to share as part of a team, to try and identify ways to do things better, and the transparent communication that takes place because of our new relationship. It just does make things better. And so happy to be here. We're happy to answer questions later if you have it. But the work that American is doing is amazing, and I'm happy to be a partner with them on it. That's all I have.
Thank you, James and Sean, for a really inspirational presentation, truly inspirational. Really interesting to see the data-driven approach you've taken. I think this seems to have been really captured the imagination of the audience, who have asked some really probing questions. So looking forward to the Q&A later on that. Fantastic also to see the collaborative approach between Airline Pilot Association and the regulator, which is arguably a model for us all to look at. So continuing with the theme of practical operational experience, it's now my privilege to introduce one ex and one current employee of Cathay Pacific Airways, Adam Johns and Val State. Adam is a safety specialist currently with Keolis Amy Docklands in the light railway sector. Adam spent a decade in the aviation safety field working for Virgin Atlantic, the UK Civil Aviation Authority, and most recently Cathay Pacific Airways in Hong Kong. Adam is passionate about the practical application in complex operating environments of contemporary safety science, such as Safety 2, resilience engineering, and systems theory. Val has two roles at Cathay Pacific Airways. She flies long haul on the Boeing 777 and works in risk assessment for flight operations, applying her human factors background to safety management and incident investigation. She's currently working on real-world ways to implement the latest science behind safety management, systems thinking, and resilience engineering to better understand and increase safety in aviation. So without further ado, over to you, Adam, first.
Thanks, Joji, and good afternoon, everybody from the UK. I'll just share my screen. If you could just confirm for me, Joji, that you can see the slides.
Yep, got those, Adam, thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, so hi, everybody. As Joji said, I'm Adam. I used to work for Cathay up till last year, returned back to the UK after 4 years out there, and have now moved into the light rail sector, the Docklands Light Railway. And I'm actually in the progress of trying to do some of the things that we're going to talk to you about today in that new organisation. So myself and Val are actually going to kind of tag team this presentation. So I'll start, pass over to Val, Val will pass back to me, and then Val will finish off. And much like the presentation James just gave, this is very much about practical application of some of the ideas that were sort of talked about in a more theoretical way yesterday. So it's good to see I've actually had a look at the participant list. A lot of familiar names, but also a lot that are unfamiliar to me as well. So Some of you will have seen elements of this presentation before, some of you, it will be brand new. So hopefully everybody will be able to get something new out of it. So as you can see there, title of the presentation is really about evolving the management of safety at Cathay, and we're going to talk to you about how we did that over the sort of past 2 years or so. So within the presentation, it's really going to cover 3 key themes. The first theme is change language to change thinking. And this is really going to focus on the importance of how we use language in order to affect the way that people think about safety within air operations. And it's something that Stephen Sharrock in particular talked about yesterday. And we'll be actually covering some of his work as we go. The second theme is around developing new principles and practices based on the theory, and not just one theory, but a series of different theories that we've kind of come across over the past period. And then finally, the actual implementation of those. And that's particularly what Val is going to focus on, because over the past sort of 12 months or so, Cathay's really started to implement a lot of this stuff in practice. So just before we move into the meat of it, who are Cathay? Probably familiar to some of you and perhaps less familiar to others. It's actually formed 75 years ago this year. So it's been going a long time out in Hong Kong. Also includes 2 other air operator certificate holders. So that's Hong Kong Express, who are a low-cost carrier within the sort of Asia Pacific area, and also Air Hong Kong, who are a sort of a tactical cargo carrier. Within the group, there are about 240 aircraft, ranging from A330s, A350s through to the modern Boeing fleets as well. As a group, there are over 100 destinations that Cathay Pacific Group serves, and it's also a founder member of the One World Group. So quite a big heritage. We're talking about over 20,000 employees within the group. So it's certainly a significant sized organization. So if we just have a look at the Cathay organization from the operations side, you can see here that like most airlines, it's sort of built up by 5 main sort of functional capability areas of flight operations, cabin operations, engineering, ramp, and cargo. And those 5 then feed up into an operational leadership function that then ultimately feeds into the executive function. And then on the side there, you have corporate safety, or although what is actually called group safety and operational risk management, looks after security, quality, and business resilience. That then supports those operational functions from an independent perspective, and then feeds into the operations and executive leadership with safety information, safety performance, etc. So what we're going to be predominantly talking about this afternoon is the flight operations aspect, which is obviously where Val comes from, and that's where most of the sort of safety 2 type activity has been applied within Cathay. So I want to take you back, or take myself back to a conference I went to just under 2 years ago, where I met people like James Quasney, who you've just heard from. It was in St. Petersburg in Florida, a Safety 2 in Practice workshop. And whilst that was extremely valuable in many ways for myself and for Cathay in terms of the learning that we took back from that, which involved multiple different industries talking about how they've been doing Safety 2. The main thing that I took away from it was about this importance of language, the importance of thinking about the language we use, and a lot of the things that Steve Sharrock talked about yesterday as well, around talking about safety in a more descriptive way and less a normative and an evaluative way. So a term that we sort of brought back to Cathay from that conference was this idea of words create worlds. So if we want to help people make sense of the world around them, then we need to think about the language that we use to describe it. And if we just focus on safety, again, sort of just to sort of reiterate what Steve Sharrock was saying yesterday, a lot of the language that we use around safety is quite negative. It's about accidents and incidents and errors and violations and non-compliances, etc. What we felt we wanted to do, if we were going to bring a Safety 2 approach into Cathay, was to start looking at the language that we use to describe safety and whether or not we can actually move that in a different direction to make it more neutral and make it more descriptive and less normative, sort of avoiding terms like, you know, the pilot failed to do this or the engineer should have done that, is to actually just describe what people do, not what they don't do or what they should do. So a big theme for us was around trying to change the language associated with safety in order to try and change the way people think about it, to move more towards some of the theoretical concepts that were shared yesterday. One of the really sort of central documents and concepts that we used to bring this in was systems thinking. And again, Steve has stolen quite a lot of the thunder on this in terms of what he shared yesterday. So these are the 10 principles of system thinking, which are shared in the Eurocontrol paper. And then these are sort of broken down into 4 subgroups. So we've got the first 3, which are talking about people within systems, so the role that people play. The next 2 talking about how system conditions affect work. So what are the demands and pressures on people? What resources do they have? What constraints are they working within? What are the interactions and flows of work and trade-offs and performance variability, creating this kind of nature of system behavior? And then finally, the interactions affecting systems outcomes, such as emergence and equivalence. So emergence being the principle that actually safety and all other properties of work emerge from the complex interactions between the various components, so it's people and technology and procedures, etc. So really crucial document and sort of guiding piece that this was for us during this period. So within the flight operations domain, we then created a poster that took these 10 principles and posted that all over the sort of flight ops management office, and started communicating that to managers and to sort of pilots that were coming in, just to sort of say, look, this is the way that we're starting to try and move the organization, taking more of a system-based approach and trying to understand things from this perspective. So having scoured that document and scoured, lots of other safety 2, safety differently, resilience engineering, and sort of more kind of traditional human factors type literature, we started to come up with a language that we wanted to bring in to apply to the safety domain, and in some cases replace existing language, such as investigation, incident, which typically have quite a sort of a prejudiced feel to them. They're quite judgmental. To sort of move more towards a descriptive language. So you can see terms in here like talking about performance variability, talking about capacity, understanding normal work, curiosity without judgment. So this word cloud really kind of helped us to articulate the sorts of language that we wanted to use to describe safety performance and just generally work within the organization, because actually, as was spoken about yesterday, this isn't really about safety anymore. This is just about understanding work and then trying to improve that work. And by doing that, you should actually not just improve safety, but improve some of the other emergent properties of it. So one of the practical things we did with this new language was we went out to our safety meetings. So each of those green boxes I showed you earlier, all of the different functions all have their own monthly safety meeting. They roll up into a safety meeting for the whole organization. And what we decided to do was provide an article that took no longer than 5 minutes to read to each of those meetings with the agenda pack, and then in the meeting present a 10 to 15 minute presentation on the concept, and then try and get a discussion going about it. And these are the concepts that we talked about. So again, some of this language, if it wasn't familiar to you before, should start to become more familiar now. So we've got concepts in there like the efficiency, thoroughness, trade-off, the varieties of human work, so work as imagined and work as done. And quite importantly as well, is in this understanding of the difference between complicated and complex systems, which Stephen went through yesterday. So really important, and I think this was quite a valuable exercise, because it helped people to understand some of this new language in a bite-sized way, and then they could take that. And actually what we found was sort of in subsequent meetings, people would start using that language. So they would start talking about work as imagined and work as done, the sort of the meeting after we'd discussed it and brought that term to people's attention. So here's an example. This is actually taken from the systems thinking paper, the section on local rationality. So this is all about trying to understand why people do things that make sense to them. So as you can see there on the top of the screen, it says people do things that make sense to them, given their goals, understanding of the situation, and focus of attention at the time. So we're trying to get people to understand that. And on the right there, you can see using Sidney Decker's tunnel metaphor to try and tell people that actually when you're trying to understand people's performance and understand their decisions and actions, you need to get inside the tunnel with them to understand what information they had when they made the decision, rather than knowing the outcome and judging people's decisions based on your knowledge of how things ended up. So a really sort of other important part of this was what we call the Cathay safety nerds. So initially this was a group of about 2 or 3 and has since snowballed to perhaps 6 or 7 people, maybe more. But actually it was kind of really organic in the way this developed. And what this helped to achieve was that we didn't just have a sort of a small group of people trying to sell this message, it actually became much larger. We had a larger group of people who were talking this language and really trying to sort of champion it across the organization. And we actually had a WhatsApp group to sort of share ideas, to share articles and papers, to sort of really take this in a more organic direction, rather than just sort of handling things via email. So trying to use modern technology to sort of share and move us forward. And very proud nerds we are, and I know a number of them are on the webinar today. So one of the other aspects that we were able to do was to talk to our training captains through a series of workshops, so about 300 plus training captains across 10 or 12 workshops, where we shared with them some of these ideas and what role we needed them to play to actually help move the organization in this new direction with safety management, as obviously they are the leaders on the front line of the flight deck. As part of the pilot training program, my colleague Peter Hudson shared with the pilots these 3 safety truths as part of a video. So we talked about how you can't fix pilot error, but you can be incident free. Pilots don't come to work to do a bad job, and you can't fix safety by focusing on safety. So really trying to, again, using quite simple language to try not just get this out to the management, but actually get it out to the front line as well, and sort of try and communicate with everybody and start pushing this out in an organic fashion. One of the things we shared with the trainers was actually Eric's diagram you saw yesterday, showing the difference between outcomes in safety and how we tend to focus most of our attention when things go below this limit of unacceptable performance. And if you think about this from a pilot training or any form of training assessment perspective, if you sort of map, like in Cathay's sense, a scale of 1 to 5 to sort of evaluate pilot performance, what you would typically find in the way that pilot training reports are written is that 1s and 2s might get quite a significant write-up, but 3s, 4s and 5s perhaps wouldn't, because the expectation is that performance was normal, therefore there's nothing to learn. But actually the opposite is true. The more normal performance is, the more there is to learn, because actually what we're looking for there is indicators of resilient performance, which Val will come on to talk about in a moment. So when pilots are performing observations of other pilots, the mnemonic that they originally used was to observe the performance, to record it, to classify it, and then evaluate it. And during this sort of period of change, a new element was introduced to that, which is to clarify. So after you've observed and recorded the performance of the pilot, you need to clarify, why did it make sense to them to do what they did, rather than to make an assumption or to make a judgment about it before you then classify and evaluate. Because as the maxim goes, people will never do things that don't make sense to them. So our job when we're trying to evaluate people's performance, whether that's in a training environment or in the real world environment, is to understand, why did it make sense to people to do what they did, given the various contextual factors that were at play. So with regards to that, my colleague Val, who's going to talk to you very shortly, took the 4 resilience potentials that Eric shared yesterday, and James has obviously taken within American Airlines and adapted, and sort of essentially carried out a bit of a thesaurus exercise to identify where some of this language can be found in terms of synonyms. So for instance, anticipate could be weighted, it could be prepared for or forecast. And whether it's in pilot training reports or in air safety reports, to actually look for this language to help identify where there could be some potential resilient performance that could be classified and evaluated as a result. So now I'm going to hand over to Val, who's going to take you through a bit more detail about some of the work around pilot training.
Thanks, Adam. So now we have some language that we can look for and some words that are in our everyday reports. And the training department's taken this and they've come up with a list of resilient performance of desirable things that went well in training reports, what pilots are doing successfully on their checks. So some examples of anticipate would be a spare capacity to problem solve, or understanding of procedures, being able to anticipate future considerations. By identifying these skills, we can start to form a picture of what's going well and a picture as work has done, or at least work has disclosed. As John Holbrook highlighted yesterday, we're not actually doing anything new, but we are looking at what we've got in a different way. Thank you. Next, thanks, Adam. So on the more recent things we've done, takes us back to the trainers refresher, and this is from last autumn, so we're well into COVID times now. And we looked at taking the resilience analysis one step further. It's obviously a very challenging environment at the moment, and Eric yesterday talked about small adjustments allowing things to go well. And we wanted to understand how the pilots are adapting to make the environment work at the moment. So we did an online poll with our trainers during the presentation, and this is what they told us. We got 251 responses, which we analysed for themes and patterns, and we also looked at the resilience potentials for each response, similar to John Holbrook's coding of desired behaviours yesterday that we saw. Most of the responses had one main resilience potential, but some, there wasn't one that stood out more than the others, and as James was just saying, they were linked, so where we saw the two potentials interacting, we analysed that as well. So as you can see on the left, most risks are managed with respond and anticipate, monitor and learn, fairly even. However, when we looked at anticipate and respond, that was 80% of how risks are managed. Interestingly, when we looked at the non-flying side, it was quite different. So there's a lot of what we're doing that is not directly related to the flying that's going on at the moment. About 20% of the risks were non-flying. We call them circumstantial risks, and managing these, about 3/4 were response with very little anticipate. That suggests we're reacting to unexpected situations, there are things we can't plan for, and perhaps things we can't control or foresee. Eric also mentioned about safety being the ability to perform under expected and unexpected events, and that would possibly describe this data well. In the non-flying side also, a significant amount of this was personal and interpersonal skills as opposed to direct flying skills. So highlights how important these skills are in the current climate for managing risks. Next slide, please. So at the end of the analysis, we came to 4 cornerstones of risk management. Preparation, that includes refreshing knowledge, briefings, personal preparation as well, rest, exercise, a lot of anticipation here. Awareness, this goes well beyond our ideas of situational awareness to awareness of the environment, the people that we're working with, gaining understanding of that environment, risk evaluation and monitoring, so a lot of monitoring in here. Increasing safety boundaries, crew operating conservatively and actively monitoring time and workload, and managing training value, perhaps choosing when and when not to train, so a lot of response here. And finally, and interestingly, personal attitude was a way of managing risk at the moment, particularly empathy. It was highlighted as a #1 thing in every presentation that we did. We did 14 weeks over the autumn. And also optimism, bringing a positive attitude to training was what worked for the trainers. Next slide, please. So it's interesting, this is something we're already doing. We're getting all this data. It's a safety 2 perspective of what's going well, normal work, adaptations, and getting the job done. And also about learnings. We told trainers to tell each other how they're managing risk and learn from each other. So we're now asking ourselves, we've got this data, what do we do with it? How do we represent this? It's not fitting on the bar chart. So what we started doing is showing the bar charts, quantitative data, but using qualitative to put it into context, to give the bar charts meaning, if you like. And looking at context and trends in the system rather than individual events, we're looking at the system holistically. Capturing information outside the reporting system, a lot of this just doesn't exist in the safety one conventionally set up. So one example would be FRMS. So we can predict feed fatigue on tasks, time of day, number of sectors, this kind of thing, but it doesn't capture noisy hotels or inability to exercise for days on end, or perhaps even get food, or the increased complexity of operation. So for that, we're bringing in the storytelling and context, and we get a much better understanding of the system. Next slide, please. So one example of how we do this is with word clouds. We see these all about the office now. People are very used to them. They look very simple, and that's deliberate. It makes complex data accessible and straightforward to grasp. And they engage the room and start safety conversations. Safety doesn't happen in bar charts, it happens in the conversations around the data, and this is what these are good at generating. So the size of the words here is proportional to the importance, and there's actually 12 months of data in these of looking at themes and patterns within the higher risk and more frequent events, which are then distilled into these words. However, the most powerful way we have to capture our rich and complex system is to run an operational learning review. So Adam's going to talk a little bit about that now.
Thanks, Val. So yeah, the operational learning review is probably the most sort of substantial process that was developed at Cathay about 18 months ago, whilst I was still there. So we're going to talk to you now about what that is, and then Val is going to sort of put some meat on the bones and talk about how it's actually been used and what the value that's come from it is. So before we get into the operational learning review, or OLR itself, it's worth highlighting that before we kind of got to that point, we decided that it would be quite important to put together a safety philosophy document. So most organizations will have a safety policy, and under that policy will fall processes and procedures and practices. But we found that safety policies tend to be quite dry as documents, and actually what we wanted to do was produce more of a philosophical document that talked about the principles behind how flight operations within Cathay was actually going to move when it came to safety management. So I've just extracted the first paragraph there just to show you that what we were saying is that when it comes to safety, we've chosen to define it as the presence of something positive rather than simply the absence of incidents and accidents. And ultimately, our aims in managing safety are to optimize human well-being and improve system performance. So it's not just about preventing accidents anymore, it's actually a much more holistic set of goals. And within that philosophy document, it also talks about appreciating that safety is one of many competing goals, talks about just culture, it talks about a sort of a forward-looking approach to accountability. And actually this formed a really good guiding document on which the OLR process could actually be developed, because what we were trying to say was that everything that happens within the department has to fall in under this philosophy and has to align to it and abide by it. So in terms of sort of making recommendations to others out there, I would suggest that actually going back to the principles and really trying to make sure that as an organization, if you want to go down this sort of safety to resilience direction, start thinking about what principles and what philosophy you want to adopt within the organization in order to try and move in this new direction. Because actually, if you just do the practices without the principles, then it's probably not going to have much longevity. So what is an OLR? So just some sort of high level principles. So it really is about taking a systems approach. It really is about ensuring that organizational learning or facilitating organizational learning and improvement are the sole objectives. So much like you would expect to see in a lot of organizations, you know, we're not here to apportion blame or liability, but it really is about enhancing the focus on learning. You know, when we come to the end of an OLR, can we say that we've learned anything? If not, then perhaps we need to go back and do it again. So learning, learning, learning. And that's why the word learning is in the title, obviously. Sort of going back to that principle of local rationality, it's been designed as a process to help understand why it made sense for people to do what they did, because people do things that make sense to them. It is much more about focusing on normal work. So it's not just to be used for events or incidents or undesired aircraft states. It can actually be used as a process to help you understand normal work as a whole, rather than just, you know, when things have gone wrong. And sort of linked to that, it's about identifying where work went well and why. So not just sort of trying to understand and certainly not judge people's performance when things have gone wrong, but we also want to try and understand where our controls or the resilient performance of individuals has actually helped us to be successful in not just in cases of success, but also in cases of organizational failure where harm or damage or loss has occurred. There could still be positive performance that we need to identify rather than just focusing on the negative. And it's perhaps worth adding as well that the next speaker, Dr. Ivan Popelady, was actually one of the sort of main inspirations for this process as he developed the learning review at the US Forest Service. And I expect he will be talking a little bit about that after we've spoken. So in terms of some key principles and protocols, I think this is a really, really important slide, because what we're talking about here is that, okay, firstly, when it comes to the OLR, we need to put system learning before individual learning. We don't want to go straight into trying to identify what learning is for individuals involved in an event, whether that's you know, a flight safety event or a ground safety event or whatever it may be. We actually want to try and understand at the system level what happened, why did it happen, and how can we learn from a system perspective before we go anywhere near individual learning. Because when we go and talk to individuals about what they need to learn and improve, actually we want to go to them beforehand, having said, right, this is what we've learned about the system. The procedures need to be updated, or the training needs to be changed. Otherwise, it feels to them like all the burden's being placed on them, when in actual fact, most cases, the system has in some way contributed to the event occurring. Very importantly, when individuals are spoken to about their learning, rather than going to them and saying what they need to learn, is to actually ask them what they need, give them the opportunity, allow them to take accountability for their own learning, so that when it comes to identifying what they need, they have a chance to play into that. And that kind of creates a greater culture of personal ownership around learning and improvement. When it comes to those interventions at the individual level, there might be certain cases where actually you do need to kind of maybe demote somebody, or provide some quite serious retraining for them. But what's really important to say about the OLR is that it's clear within the process and the policy that any interventions focused on individuals shall not be punitive. And if you look up the definition for punitive, it's intent to punish. So when we do, or if you do take interventions focused on individuals, you're doing that to protect the integrity of the system and avoid risk, not to punish the person involved. And certainly you don't want to miss out on any system learning as part of that process. So really, really key point. You can still demote someone in an OLR if you absolutely need to, but you make it clear that you're doing that to protect the integrity of the system, not to punish the individual involved. And both the system and the individual are accountable for learning. So both parties are actually accountable for learning and improving. The system in terms of the organization, the senior leaders, the management who actually have the responsibility for system design are just as accountable for learning and improving as the individuals involved in the incident or the event, or just the learning exercise that's being looked at. So now I'm going to hand back to Val, who's going to talk to you about the OLR in practice and take us to the close.
Thanks, Adam. So let's bring this into the real world now. So one example of where these principles were borne out in practice involved a 777 event with an engine fire on climb. The OLR approach that we took allowed us to see how the conditions for the event to happen emerged from the system. So we got to understand the system about it. And we changed the system. We included in our recurrent simulator checks on the next run round of handling overweight landings and immediate returns. Once we'd got the system learning, then we asked the individual what they needed, and the captain asked for more simulator time to practice, and he did just that. And the captain then regained confidence in the procedures and the aircraft and in their own capabilities as well, that they demonstrated to themselves. Also, the system could be confident in the captain now. We've gone through this robust process. So where some events in the past might, as Adam said, end up in demotion or at least team biscuits with the chief pilot, this was actually a restorative experience because we understood the sense making from the crew's point of view and approached it from curiosity without judgment. Next slide, please. So an overview of the OLR process. Opportunities to learn, it says in our procedures manual, any event is an opportunity to learn, regardless of outcome. Obviously, we've got limited resources and it tends to be the more exciting events, but we're open to learning from everything, and that's the point, is the intent there. Step 2, logistics needs some careful consideration. We might have 4 crew, 2 managers, and people all over the world in a 24/7 operation, and getting them together in a timely manner is important, because first of all, we want clear recall from the crew, so we get an accurate account of the event. And also to minimize stress on the crew. It's can be daunting going into these things, and we're aware of that. So we'd like to get the learning and put it back into the system and move on. Gathering all sources, we may get much information from the crew. We have a semi-structured interview, typically lasts 1 hour, and they're put at the center of it. They are the experts because they were there. I wasn't. I have an idea of what I think was going on, but only they can tell me the work is done. One point here is that there are many versions of the truth. We may have 4 crew and 4 different mental models in the cockpit, and that's absolutely fine. They sit next to each other because they're all valid, and flight data will tell another story and air traffic control will tell another story. So we don't actually end up at an ending. We have somewhere in the middle of this is probably nearest of what happened, but as Stephen Shorrock said yesterday, there are multiple ways to look at any event. The analysis and sense making assumes positive content. So people don't wake up in the morning and think, oh, today I'm going to fly close to that hill and see what happens. It just doesn't happen. So there are a few very rare cases where people do have malicious intent, but generally, overwhelmingly, they don't. That's the expectation that we start with. Accountability is a big part of the process. So sharing the learning, this may be through articles or perhaps, as we said earlier, changing simulator profiles, and then constantly reviewing the effectiveness. So we're in the process of a post-OLR survey for the crew, and we are still involving the language. Some projects coming off of this, we're collating the learning from all the OLRs for analysis in the future, just to see what the process is giving us and see where our return of investments is and what we're getting out of it most. And we're also collating protective factors. It's things that worked well. This is based on Thoroman's work 2018. Things that mitigated the risks and threats, allowed the flight to return to normal, and the adaptations that are going on. As John Holbrook pointed out yesterday, positive behavior is already in the data, but we just need to look at it through a slightly different lens. Another important point is for just culture and to increase openness and psychological safety. The OLR is not recorded in the training records, so it can't prejudice the pilot in the future if somebody goes back and looks. And it's an internal investigation, so the information is on need-to-know basis, and we'll just give a relevant summary to the outside bodies if they need it, but they won't get the meat of the OLR. That stays within house. So let's see how the OLR is captured. Next slide, please, Adam. So what we want to do is capture the system conditions that emerge, the influences that shape the performance, and the sense making. We start off with a report, which is the list on the right-hand side, and a relationship influence map, which you see on the left-hand side, which I'll come back to shortly. So the context might include things like environment, equipment, condition of crew, non-work factors, which we're seeing time after time at the moment related to COVID and quarantine. Performance shaping factors, CRM would be in here, perhaps behaviors and interactions, habits and norms, and similar to as Stephen Shorrock was talking yesterday, goal conflicts, demands and pressures, and trade-offs. Learning, system learning for individual learning, and then recommendations which go back into the SMS. The relationship map on the left, this is from a gear left down event, and from the report, there are the main green areas, the key PSFs. And then we have the sub-themes and how they relate to each other. So again, we have the many versions of the truth between the relationship map and the report working together. And hopefully between them, they capture the essence of the story and the sense making. Next slide, please. So the OLRs, the information now feeds into a bigger picture. This is a dashboard. American James was talking about go around in decision making, and it's one of our top 5 considerations for our safety risks that we talk about every month. Alongside the OLR information, we have the higher and more frequency risks, we have safety reports, communications from crew, perhaps industry guidelines. So a lot of information goes into one of these dashboards. We also use them for flight data analysis for higher risk airfields. So again, it's a way of getting complex information into one chewable, easy to access slide. Thank you, Adam. Next slide. So the OLR is pretty resource heavy, so we need to make sure that we're getting a return on investment. And we do feel we are. We found this to be an extremely powerful process. Firstly, the system is much better informed about what's happening as opposed to what we imagine is going on. One of the key hooks, the chief pilots love finding out things they would never have known otherwise. We have a much better understanding of the system. And this also allows us to be sensitive to weak signals. So we'll be getting information all the time from crew reports and ASRs and so on. And because the OLR is done in so much more depth, it starts us to allow to join the dots, particularly in a fast changing environment that we have at the moment. Change in safety climate, people are talking about learning rather than blame now. And for the pilots, we have a totally different quality of experience for them. They're treated as the expert. They make the system safer by sharing their experience now. And also we're asking them to identify what went well, not just the errors, which we're not used to doing as crew, and appreciate this is not a comfortable process, standing in front of people and describing something that you're not particularly proud about, but it's important that they see the positive factors as well and see both sides. And finally, we're getting better safety improvements. We've identified and implemented at multiple levels because we've learned from multiple levels during the learning review. Next slide, please. Of course, this is a team effort. As Adam said earlier, one of the keys was having a vanguard, a group of safety nerds, people passionate who want to make the ideas catch fire. And then this spreads through the organization. So Adam did a lot of excellent work laying the foundations, and the safety nerds have taken it forwards. We've also been fortunate to have high level support to be able to explore and implement these ideas. So here are some people in Cathay you can get in touch with if you want to learn more about our Safety 2 work, or the learner reviews, or just some general nerding. We're always open to share ideas. Pete McCarthy, head of group human factors, is pursuing the OLR at PhD level. He's got a paper called The Application of Safety 2 in Commercial Aviation, the Operational Learning Review, which you have his email there if that interests you. Next slide, please. So wrapping up, takeaways. The exam question is, how do you apply science in the real world? We had all these fantastic models and theories, and we read and read and read and still do until we understood them. And that meant we were able to cherry pick for our organization, if you like. So in the early days, Adam did a lot of work with American, which has filtered down to us. They're an inspiration for what we do now. But as James mentioned earlier, they have a distinct culture and so do we. So our paths are running parallel, but they're not the same, and nor should they be, because we've got two different operations. You can't buy this stuff off the shelf. The next takeaway is words create worlds, and then think holistically, think at a systems level. Storytelling and context, ask why it made sense. People come to work to do a good job. And finally, look at the spectrum of normal work. And you can do this by starting where you are and working with what you have, but look at it in a different way. Thank you all for listening. I'm Valerie State, and with me is Adam Johns. If you want to get in touch with us, we are on the emails here or through LinkedIn, and be very happy to chat and throw ideas around. Adam?
Thanks, everybody. Back to you, Joji.
Thank you, Adam and Val, for another inspiring presentation. Wow, it just keeps coming, doesn't it? It feels like emphasis on changing language to change thinking is so key to the success of Cathay's program and also at American. As is understanding work better and for improving work generally, safety improvement becomes a natural byproduct. It's also really refreshing to hear about the operational learning review process. and how it asks the individual what they need to learn and to improve. Truly refreshing. So the last presentation before we take a break, we'll now hear from another leading light in this field, who has married operational experience with research and teaching. Again, it's my great honor to introduce Ivan Papalidi. Ivan is an adjunct professor and consultant who applies his operational experience as a pilot for the US Coast Guard, US Air Force, and US Forest Service to his research and teaching. He developed an alternative approach to accident investigation called the Learning Review, which has been used by several organizations around the world. His current research is focused on improving operations in complex systems and high-risk environments, such as wildland firefighting, aviation, military, and medicine. Thank you, Ivan, over to you.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it. Let's see if I can share my screen. Looking good. And we'll start off there. So, good afternoon to you in Great Britain. Good morning to those of us who are watching the sun come up in the US. I'm going to kind of give you a sense of the way success can happen in a large organization. So I'm going to tell you a story. And the story that I'm going to tell you shows that this can actually, this approach can actually be applied in an organization of the size of 38,000 people scattered across the entire United States. And the story is going to be the story of the Forest Service. But before I go there, let me tell you just a little bit about me and how I got to this place. I started out flying in the Coast Guard, Falcon jets and C-130s. Flew 10 years active duty in the Coast Guard, and I lost 2 friends in aviation accidents over that 10-year period. I was in the Forest Service as a lead plane pilot, which, if you look at the upper right-hand picture, the small plane that's guiding the big plane in over the fire. In my first year in the Forest Service, I lost 2 friends in aviation accidents. By the time I'd been in the Forest Service for 10 years, I'd lost 10 friends in aviation accidents. I felt like something had to change, something had to go a bit differently. And that's when I moved into aviation safety in the Forest Service. And that ultimately propelled me to a position where I started doing accident investigations. I'd been trained as an accident investigator by the Coast Guard and later by the Air Force, having completed both their aviation safety accident investigation programs. And I also went through the USC aviation safety program and completed that to the certificate level. So I felt like I was pretty well trained in accident investigation, and the Forest Service felt that way as well. And they sent me on my first mission to go ahead and do an accident investigation. And I felt completely ill-equipped based on the equipment that we were given in terms of the guide in particular. So when I talk about this, I talk about our story, our Forest Service story, which is a story of self-designing cultural change. I had moved to the director level of the Forest Service, and in that process had been asked to actually shift the Forest Service's culture and create a safety culture within the Forest Service. Well, the first thing I did was I tried to decide what safety meant. And what I found out after polling many, many people in the Forest Service is that there was no unilateral definition of safety in the organization. So how are we going to coalesce around something? You know, as Adam said, the principles are super important. If we don't agree on the basic principle or meaning of the key word, what do we do? So we stumbled, I would say, stumbled and fell a few times, but we succeeded in starting to press the boundaries of this understanding and think about shifting culture, not necessarily from the aspect of a safety culture, but from the aspect of a learning culture. So this rather tedious looking thing is a kind of a map of the evolutionary milestones that we went through in our organization. And I don't have time, obviously, to take you through all of this. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on some highlights. For example, the challenge of the accident investigation model, the SAVE model, serious accident investigation. Our work with Los Alamos National Lab and Todd Conklin to develop a Forest Service HOP, or HOP, we called it HOPE, and then HOPE dialogue shared throughout the Forest Service. And I'm going to give you just a little snippet of what that looks like. Our research and development piece, which started as principally me, and then became a larger group of people as we started to develop an organization to do this, which we called innovation and organizational learning, and what leadership was going through. So leadership understands why and how safety works, and leadership led national dialogues. And we're going to talk a little bit about those. So those are the highlights that we're going to talk about. And I want to point out that this was a nested approach that emerged. We didn't design this approach. It happened organically as we started to do the research and started to do the application. So the evolutionary milestones, again, that I'm going to chat about: leadership journey, the challenges and assumptions around error, challenging the assumptions around error, changing the investigation paradigm, the role of research, and then metrics, like how do we know we're successful? And those are the things that I'm going to chat about. So right into the leadership journey. This is my dog at the market, and obviously I'm not following the rules. And leadership asked, why don't people just follow the rules? The assumption there that if we did follow the rules, we would be safe. Well, we had to bring to them an image of what that was really like, what that really meant. And what we did was we started to challenge it rather comedically using the HOP framework. So we showed them images like this. Well, I'd love to follow the rule if the rule made sense. In this case, keep off red line. I'd be happy to do it if I could find the red line. Another example is something like this, where rules are just so cumbersome and so difficult to understand that it takes a great deal of sense making on the part of the user to figure out exactly where they fit in this rule, regulation, policy, or procedure. Another example, this one happens to be on the highway leaving Los Alamos, going back down to our home here in Santa Fe. And these signs are just as they seem, just that close to one another. And I'm just not exactly sure what I'm supposed to do here. I love this one. Not exactly sure what that means. And perhaps my favorite. This seems rather self-correcting in my view. So what we did was we started to challenge the idea of rules, like I say, comedically, but we also added dialogue through the HOP process. And we actually called them HOP or HOP dialogues. And the idea was that we would get people together at various levels of the organization and start to talk about these kinds of things that exist in our system, that are normal things inside our system that we accept on a day-to-day basis, with it in mind that what we're going to do is we're going to challenge some of the deep assumptions that people hold about safety. So that was the purpose of HOP. Let me tell you about what happened inside the Forest Service. Now, this process really started in 1991 with the fatality of a smoke jumper, where the smoke jumper was literally blamed for his own death in the accident investigation. This continued as a pattern through some very seminal and very important accidents in the history of the Forest Service, including the South Canyon fire, which generated a study called the Tri-Data study, where we actually had an outside company come in and look at the Forest Service, look at the culture, try and understand what was going on. We actually had Peter Senge involved in that. We brought in a short course from MIT executives to try and help the organization understand. And we held our first wildland fire safety summit. And the reason that safety summit emerged was kind of interesting. Again, we had an accident that involved the fatality of several people. And the fatality investigation said that they failed to follow the rules, regulations, policies, and procedures of the organization. Now, we're going to get to why that happened in a written guide and an excerpt of it here in just a minute. But what I want to point out here is that the field became so disenchanted with what was being told to them about what the causes of these accidents were, that they demanded more. Not only did they demand more, they began to distrust not only the organization, but the leadership in the organization and the processes that the leadership fell in love with, including the accident investigation. So by 1997 to 99, we had a bunch more of these, and we had a terrible fatality of 4 very junior firefighters at a place up in northern Washington that actually shakes the core fiber of the culture of the organization. This was called the 30 Mile Fire. And in the 30 Mile Fire, not only did we have people who were blamed at the point of work for their actions, who were literally described as being causal, but we also had retribution being taken place on the part of the Office of the Inspector General and the Attorney General's office of the state of Washington, where they actually brought civil charges and criminal charges against the leadership of these organizations. The result was terrible. I'm going to share an aviation example with you, and this aviation example is Tanker 9. It's a P2V Neptune. This crash resulted in the fatality of 3 good friends of mine. The one in the center, Gene Wallstrom. He and I did quite a bit of work together. So this crisis of trust resulted from this traditional investigation, which sought to find simple cause in situations that weren't at all simple. The pilot and crew were dead. One of the 2 jet engines that powered the P2V Neptune had come apart in flight. Parts of the engine punched holes in the underside of the wing, releasing gallons of aviation-grade fuel, which quickly ignited. Parts of the wing began to fall away from the aircraft, including part of the left aileron. The sequence was fast. This is an excerpt from the cockpit voice recorder. Pilot said, "Whoa," followed by a sound of heavy breathing. "We got a fire over here, a big old fire. I'm holding full right aileron." Heavy breathing. Heavy breathing. Sound of impact. End of recording. 26.9 seconds for this crew to make sense of what they had, to try and put control inputs into the aircraft with an aileron that was melted away. It was gone. The accident investigation guide, here's that excerpt that I promised you, said this: "The causes of most accidents or incidents are the result of failures to observe established policies, procedures, and controls." Well, the NTSB had given authority to the Forest Service to conduct the investigation, and the Forest Service investigators used this guide to generate their report. And their conclusion, which was written up in the NTSB probable cause, was the failure of the flight crew to maintain airspeed above in-flight minimum control speed after losing power in the left jet engine during initial climb after takeoff. Contributing to the accident was the crew's inadequate cockpit resource management procedures, the failure of the captain to assume command of the airplane during the emergency, the flight crew's failure to carry out the jet engine fire emergency procedure, and the failure of the crew to jettison the retardant load. Note the NTSB charged this accident to CAL FIRE. So this is an important thing in the language, again, of accident investigation, and this is what we faced. This was accepted by levels of the organization as causal, and what it really represents are a bunch of labels that masquerade as explanations. So we felt that we were in a position where we had to do something different. This is what was happening at a field level. Firefighters stopped taking leadership assignments. They stopped talking to the agency and to each other. Fear began to dominate the culture. If you talk to a firefighter, they would say, "I keep a lawyer's business card in my billfold." And learning shifted to how best defend oneself from the agency. This was terrible. It was a terrible place, and it was a tremendous crisis of trust that we were facing inside the organization. Leadership began to recognize the need for change, not just because of the way we were doing accidents, but because of our history. From 1994 to 2017, we experienced over 400 line of duty firefighter fatalities, and our accident rate wasn't changing. The stuff we were doing wasn't making a difference. Well, you kind of wonder why. Why are we stuck in a place like that? Why do organizations tenaciously hold on to this sense of control, this belief that they have control through rules, regulations, policies, and procedures? Well, part of it can be explained by the difference of expectation that we have on our experts compared to our novices. So in the center of this little thing, you're going to see the expectations we have of the novice, and on the outside, you're going to see the expectations we have of the expert. We expect our novices to follow prescriptive policy. We expect our experts to improvise. We expect rote compliance from our novices because that's all they have, but we expect application and adaptation of rules, regulations, policies, and procedures from our experts. Procedures. Of course, we expect our novices to follow procedures. When I first started flying in the Navy training as a Coast Guard pilot trainee, all we had was procedures. So I can still remember before landing checklist, harness lock, Landing gear down and locked, brakes, parking brakes off, brakes pump firm, gear down, flaps down, landing checks complete. Those procedures were ingrained in my brain. That's what was expected of the novice. But if I did hand that or put that landing gear handle down and nothing happened, now I'm in the realm of complex adaptive problem solving. I can turn to the checklist and go as far as the checklist will take me, but then I have to rely on that expert in the back of the aircraft to help me if the situation isn't resolved from the checklist procedures. And that's that complex adaptive problem solving that we expect from our experts. Planning. Planning is very important. Of course it is. And from the perspective of our novices, planning is critical. But what we expect of our experts is intuition and knowing when to change the plan. There was a famous Prussian general by the name of von Moltke who said, planning is everything, but no plan survives first contact with the enemy. This was an understanding of the complex nature of work at a very, very early stage of our development in the military. I mean, this is a Prussian general years ago, just after the fall of Napoleon. So this is an important thing, this planning and intuition piece. Mike Tyson said, everybody's got a plan until the first punch, kind of the equivalent of what von Moltke was saying. Rules, sure, rules are important. I'm a pilot, following rules are important, but we also have to understand that tacit assumptions piece and knowing when to adapt the rules. Fortunately, in the Sea Services, Navy, Coast Guard, Marine Corps, there's a caveat in all of our flight manuals that says there's no substitute for sound judgment. Deviations from these rules are expected because the conditions can't be fully predicted. That's where the tacit assumptions come in. But from the perspective of our novices, those rules are all they have. Finally, controls. Yes, we like to have control. We want to control our novices so that we can predict what they're going to do. But when we move to that expert level of expectation, we move to the idea of empowerment. Many of our problems stem from this idea that after an accident, we no longer expect those expert level performances, and we hold our experts to the expectations of the novice. It's insulting to our experts. It's insulting to their expertise and their training. It's insulting to everything, every fiber of their being. And it ends up putting a big wedge between us and them. It also doesn't help us make sense of why they did what they did. Why did it make sense for them to do what they did? So this comes from the work of two brothers, Dreyfus and Dreyfus, from University of California, Berkeley. And I'm not going to read this whole table to you, but I'm going to share novice and expert because it's very important in our development in the Forest Service. It was very important for us to understand this. A novice has rigid adherence to rules or plans, little situational perception, no or limited discretionary judgment. Now let's bounce to the expert. The expert no longer relies on rules, guidelines, or maxims, has an intuitive grasp of situations, and the analytic approach is only used in novel situations. This last line became really critical for us because that told us that experts will naturally move into analysis if they detect that the situation is novel. So part of our issue became understanding how we could increase the capacity of the experts to recognize the anomalous situation. And that became a big part of us trying to move forward. So where do we go? Research was a very important piece of what we did. We relied heavily in the early stages on Sidney Decker's work. The first accident investigation that I was sent to that I really couldn't perform using the Serious Accident Investigation Guide is when I discovered Sidney. I subsequently ended up getting a master's degree under Sidney at Lund University and began my PhD working on this transformational work in the Forest Service around accident investigation. We also relied very heavily on David Woods, who we took on a ziplining tour, Carl Weick, Todd Conklin, and we always looked to the father of the thinking around culture, Edgar Schein. So where were we? We had to start thinking about workers. Now, before you guys get all excited and start saying what a crazy person this is, because all my OSHA friends always look at this and say, what an idiot this person is. And before you say that, let me point out that this is my wife. She is on a ladder, 1 foot on the ladder, 1 foot on a door that is not secured, and she's in a stairwell. And what is she doing? She's painting the wall. What's her goal? Her goal is to get paint on the wall and not on the ceiling. And she is a bit of a perfectionist, I have to say. So as I start to look at this situation and I start to think about it, I could do a couple of different things. I could admonish her. I could tell her that she's stupid. Is anybody married, and has anybody ever said to their wife that they're stupid? That doesn't work out very well. But that's the kind of thing that we would do in our accident investigations. Essentially, we would tell people that they died because they were stupid, when in reality, what they were doing was creating operational trade-offs based on system pressures, goals, and value conflicts. And this, by the way, was something we had to ask her. Did she feel unsafe in this activity? And her answer was no, she didn't feel unsafe. She felt like she was in control of the situation. She was one slip from serious injury, but she felt like she was in control. So this started to challenge our beliefs around risk. Why do people take these kinds of chances or things that look like unnecessary risks to us? Why do they do it? Why does it make sense to them? And it became a cornerstone of what we needed to understand in terms of accidents and in our investigative processes. So what did we do? Well, first thing we did was got rid of the word investigation because it's got some strange connotations associated with it. And we instead called the process the learning review. And I thought I'd share this with you because this is a cornerstone principle of a principle-based approach. In our effort to try to understand the behavior of others, we either explain their behavior in terms of their personality, dispositional, or we explain their behavior in terms of the situation, situational attribution. The situational attribution takes us to a very interesting place. It takes us to the questions that we want to answer around the system and the system's series of influences on the individual. If we remain in the dispositional, all we can do is blame, shame, and perhaps retrain individuals. And that's the plateau that we had reached in accident investigation. So, an organization responds and learns from its work events. How an organization responds and learns from work events shapes its culture. Effective responses lead to improvement, and poor responses lead to additional problems, some of which can be catastrophic. Well, that's exactly where we were. We were in that catastrophic place. And so we felt it very important to try and develop this learning review process as a cornerstone of our cultural shift in the organization. Learning review is based on principles. Well, there were 12 of them when we started out, but these three kind of emerge as cornerstones again. So do no further harm to the system or the people within the system. This is particularly important since we were creating second victims from our participants in these accidents. People who simply viewed them in some cases were being blamed and shamed. Learning can only take place in humble inquiry and critical reflection. What does this mean? Well, this means that we have to move people from knowing to inquiry, to humble inquiry, which we get from Edgar Schein again. And this idea of humble inquiry and critical reflection, it doesn't mean we can't say that there was a mistake made, but we have to place that mistake in context, and it becomes the context that is important to us, not the mistake itself. In fact, what we would do is work from that context, from that mistake as our origin point, if you would, into developing the context. And then we would take the context, which we called a network of influences map, and we would share that network of influences map with other people who do the same kind of job and ask them, do these influences exist in normal work? And in that way, we would move from the accident to normal work as quickly as possible. And the other principle that's very important is that our people are good and well-intended and working in a system that's perfectly designed to deliver exactly what it does. And sadly, this is very true. And so when we started to get our leadership on board with understanding this, we started to be able to deliver different types of investigations to them, and they simply wanted more. What does it look like? Well, this idea of conditions of influence as opposed to causes was very important to us. We could look at influences from a bunch of different perspectives, or we could look at causes. If we take a look at this recent thing that happened on Capitol Hill, we can say that Trump caused the rioters to attack Congress. Well, we could say that. We distance ourselves a bit from learning from the event when we say that. We also have to prove cause at that point, which we are in the process of doing through another impeachment. But if we instead think about the influence and we say that Giuliani and Trump Jr. and Trump influenced the crowd to act in a certain way, now what we've done is we've broadened our ability to talk about the event. And the burden of proof is no longer on what was said, what was done, but now it becomes on the system and how the system was affected by these words and this language. That's kind of what we're getting at in a less criminalistic sort of way, because what we want to do is we want to understand what influenced the individual's actions and decisions. Now, notice we haven't separated those two words. Actions and decisions are run together, and we do that intentionally. As we started to study cognitive science, what we began to understand is that that decisions and actions exist on a spectrum, with actions or intuitive responses on one end and decisions or deliberative responses on the other. But everything that a human being does exists someplace on that spectrum. What we realized pretty quickly is it doesn't matter whether it was an action or a decision. That's not the important thing. The important thing are the external influences, the social pressures, all of the conditions, environmental and otherwise, physical and mental, training and experience. Those things matter more to us than do the actions and decisions themselves. So rather than trying to spend time determining if it was an action or a decision, we just lumped them together. And our goal is to understand those internal and external pressures and how they influence those actions and decisions. So in order to do this, we created what we call the Network of Influences map, and I have one later if there's time. I'll share it with you so that you can take a look at it. But this is the way the learning review evolved. So what we wanted to understand is that as investigators, and we removed that title altogether, we had the ability to do harm to individuals and to the system. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to set boundaries on what that what the expectation was on the reviewer rather than the investigator, what the expectations were. So we wanted to set something up that gave them sidebars that would help them navigate this course. Not all accidents are the same, but there are certain things that we can do that are important and critical. So the first thing that we had to do was sit everybody down who was involved in one of these incident reviews, and explain to them that not all choices are black and white, and that we gather information to build what we called a complex narrative. And it's important to understand a complex narrative because a complex narrative is one that accepts that different perceptions of the event can coexist. So what one person sees and perceives to be the truth, another person can see something completely different in the exact same event. And both of those perspectives have value. In fact, both of those perspectives, capturing both of those perspectives, can help us to better understand the event and our capacity to deal with events in real time. So the real world events are predicated on if I perceive something and another person perceives something else, do I have, for example, the ability to communicate with that other person so that I can share that we don't have a shared experience here? Do I have the language that's necessary to help that happen? Now, aviation has become really good at this, but if you'll go back in the history of aviation, you'll realize that they had to learn this lesson often the hard way. And crew resource management is one of the things that emerged out of the recognition that complex, multiple perspectives can coexist, and we have to have a mechanism to understand them and bridge the gap between them. There's gathering physical information. There's no question about that. We still have to do that. And then we develop the event narrative, and we place the decisions and actions in context with the Network of Influences map. We then move into what we call the analysis and sense-making phase, and we separate the analysis from sense-making intentionally. Analysis is the reductionist approach to looking at a problem, and analysis works well for simple and complicated systems, so mechanical systems. So those systems respond very well to analysis or being taken apart and looking for the broken piece. That really works well. When we move into complex systems, that doesn't work as well. I'll give you a hokey example. I could take my motorcycle out to the front yard, lay out a blanket, and take the motorcycle apart without too much difficulty. And having the manual of instruction and the proper tools, I can reassemble the motorcycle and make it work again. That's a mechanical system. If I were to try and do the same thing with my horse, it would not work out as well. That's an organic system. They don't respond well to reduction. And any system that's complex is considered organic. And therefore, what we have to do there is enter into sense making. And that's not only the question of why it made sense to the individuals, but it's also trying to understand how they were making sense of the situation and what is that sense making, what does it look like in normal work? Again, we would use the network of influences map here, and we'd bring the network of influences map to the focus groups, and we'd ask them, are the influences on this map consistent with operations, or are they unique to the event? Now, that's an important question, because what we would allow the focus groups to do then was to change the network of influences map to look more like normal work, and we would therefore move from the accident to normal work as quickly as we could. We'll also ask them to ask what other conditions are relevant, and then what can we learn? And this learning thing becomes super important because it's not just learning for the sake of learning, that idea of individual learning, but instead it's really respecting and honoring the learners in the system. And how can we present information to them so that they can learn from the experience? We look to adult learning models for this, and the adult learning models told us that one of the things we should really look at is dialogue. How do we enter into dialogue at different levels of the organization? And what this did was this took us to phase 4, which is the Learning Review Board. And we had direct questions on what we could do to improve the system, but we also had what learning products could we deliver to the field? And sometimes the learning products were as simple as a complex narrative with pointed questions that would elicit dialogue. Well, was it working? Let's find out. Here's the Chief of the Forest Service, and here's what he had to say about this.
Throughout my Forest Service career, I have placed a special emphasis on our attention to safe work practices. As your chief, I am compelled to do everything possible to ensure that you are appropriately equipped to safely work in the complex work environments you face. I want you to feel positive about coming to work every day. I want you to know that nothing is more important to me than having each of you return home safely at the end of each workday. However, when accidents do happen, our organization's response does affect both employee morale and our future safety. We must learn everything we can from those events to prevent reoccurrence. Our past efforts to prevent or reduce serious incidences, including fatalities, have not always been as effective as intended. Even though we have always stressed safety, our fatality frequency rates remained unchanged for 40 years. This was one of the key reasons why we decided to look into how the Forest Service culture was maybe a factor. And as a result, we committed to our safety journey. Serious accidents and fatalities, they bring sorrow and hardship for families, colleagues, and other loved ones who are left behind. In addition, we have come to realize that witnesses and others close to the incident can unintentionally be harmed by our current accident investigation and response processes. Therefore, we have developed a strategy designed to minimize the negative impact of our accident review methods on survivors and on witnesses. It is essential that we consider these effects as we gather the necessary information needed to fully understand and learn from the incident. This effort, called the Coordinated Response Protocol, CRP for short, represents basic changes in how the Forest Service responds to and learns from tragic events. The CRP uses pre-trained response team members who work to lessen potential future harm to our employees. By design, this process takes every opportunity to minimize the number of interviews our personnel are exposed to, as well as control access to our employees as much as possible. Another important CRP component is the learning review, which replaces the serious accident investigation process. The learning review will collect information to help create learning products to support our ability to learn from the event. Learning review information will not be used as the basis for disciplinary action or to place blame on employees. I cannot stress this enough. The learning review is about learning. It's about understanding what happened, so if possible, we can make changes to produce a different outcome in the future. We owe it to those that make the ultimate sacrifice to honor their service by learning everything we can. We are also using another review process known as the Facilitated Learning Analysis, or FLA, that is designed to help us learn from near miss and less serious incidences. The FLA became part of the Forest Service corporate practices last year and will continue to be used for incidences that do not meet serious accident criteria. We are working to improve our learning capability. The CRP and FLA guidebooks are evolving, and they'll be updated at least annually. I consider learning from events to be a Forest Service core value, both equally fundamental to prevention and critical to our safety. Striving to help all of us to prevent accidents and fatalities is an ever-present personal interest. Something I think about constantly as I go about work. I need you to continue to take care of yourselves. Look out for each other. Use your training, follow sound guidance, and continue to make the decision to stop when you do not feel that it is safe. All of which can make a difference when the unexpected happens. Thank you for all you do.
So the chief not only introduces the learning review and the facilitated learning analysis for less than serious accidents, he also in this moment redefines accountability and says that the Forest Service as a whole is accountable to learn. This was a pivotal point in the shift of our culture. Simultaneously, or just around the same time, we entered into national dialogues, safety dialogues for the entire Forest Service, where everybody was engaged every year in dialogues to talk about safety. Leadership started this process in 2014 in their journey to try and figure out good ways to bring about safety, but initially it was coercive. In fact, the last thing that they did was they asked everybody who attended the meeting to agree to follow the rules. And the firefighters and some of the more experienced people who were there pushed back and said, I don't really know what I'm agreeing to because I can't follow every rule that we have and get the mission done. I'm in a constant goal conflict. And so it kind of fell short. But my group was given the mission of assessing the feedback that came out of that to try and inform the next year's dialogue. The next year's dialogue became more communicative. Leadership actually started to listen a little bit, and they solicited field input. And so we had a communicative shift in the organizational leadership and their approach to these dialogues. And by the time we did our third one, we were collaborative, where everybody was brought in to try and give their ideas around the issues to try and map and understand the issues better. So what we can see here is that the organization was changing not only its language in investigation, but its approach to the use of language in discourse. And this discourse became super important for us. We moved from a correct and fix to an understanding and learning model. And what did this do? Well, fundamentally, it did this. It started to challenge this idea of judgment, because judgment simply results in pain, distrust, and silence. And it started to focus more on trust and sharing information. And this trust and sharing information became pivotal. In fact, a mantra that we used is information is the currency of safety. And that became something that was very important for our organization. But as we started to implement the learning review, some other things happened. Families no longer felt like their loved ones were going to be blamed, and they became more proactive partners in trying to help us with solutions, systemic interventions, learning from the event, even some families going so far as to hold dialogue sessions in their local area with the survivors of these accidents and incidents. So families became part of our healing network. The other thing that was interesting about this is that we went from families bringing lawsuits against us in almost every single fatality investigation that the Forest Service had until the learning review, to families not bringing any litigation against the Forest Service. Very different perspectives. We started treating families as though they were members of the Forest Service team. Regulators, we had two, essentially, the National Transportation Safety Board and OSHA. NTSB pretty much abdicated the responsibility of accident investigations on national forest land involving Forest Service aircraft to the Forest Service. And Forest Service investigators ended up doing those investigations, like the Tanker 9 incident that I gave you before. That went largely unchanged, except that as we started to implement the learning review, it started to permeate that community as well, the aviation community, and they started changing their language as well. The NTSB accepted those reports just as easily as they accepted the earlier ones, showing that the regulator doesn't find problem with this. In fact, I was asked several times to come to the NTSB headquarters and talk about the learning review, which I did for the last 2 board chairmen. And the result was very favorable. Field personnel started to have more faith in the system, and they started, as we said, respecting them as learners. They started coming to the table as not only learners, but also leaders. And what we started to see was that this idea of discriminating between leadership of the organization as learners and the field personnel as learners, that was a really ugly and blurry line. There may be different things that leaders have to learn, but leaders are learners too. So we started thinking about learning products directed toward these 2 specific audiences. And ultimately what we moved to was looking at where we could get the best leverage out of an incident in terms of learning, and creating learning products that were targeted specifically to different groups. One of the cornerstones for this was understanding how the Chemical Safety Board did some of their best learning pieces. And the best learning pieces of their reports turned out to be the videos that they produced. And the videos that are produced that go along with the different accidents that they investigate, where the investigations may be a little bit not to my taste, the videos were almost always useful learning tools, and we simply could apply questions to those. So we've kind of followed that model and said, what kinds of things can we create in terms of learning products that will elicit dialogue at the different levels of the organization from the different audiences? Back to this again. You can see that this was a really big network of things that we did within the agency, within the organization. This big network, all of these things are really inextricably linked to one another. And there were a lot of different things that happened to place leadership in a mode of inquiry that was super important. There was a tremendous amount of work that we did in terms of research in different areas, specifically complexity theory, which became very important to us. And you heard Adam talk about the importance of recognizing complex systems and how they need to be handled differently. Psychological safety became super important. We looked at all the accident investigation models we could get our hands on. And we thought about how we could apply those to both sides of the spectrum. So research branching out and informing both sides. And research ends up developing a lot of the input into the HOPE dialogues that we had, and also into the learning review, as well as informing the U.S. Forest Service leadership safety journey, which is another great example of how we could move leaders to inquiry by bringing them to other organizations and showing them how, showing them how other organizations perform and build their safety programs. I'm going to go to one example, as I think I've got enough time for this. And this is an example of a network of influences map. And yes, it looks rather busy. This one deals with the transportation of laptops containing personally identifiable information. The individual who was doing this, well, I could ask if you think he's a good or a bad employee at the end, and we could stay in the dispositional place, which is where the Forest Service started. The incident was handed over to HR, and HR wanted to fire this individual for taking a laptop home. But as we start to build the context around this action decision, what we start to understand is that the reason this person wanted to take this laptop home containing the personally identifiable information of everybody in the entire Forest Service was that he was going in for knee surgery. And he was one deep in his position, and his position was the position that approved people so that they could approve the pay of their employees. He felt his job was very, very important. And it was one deep. So when he went in for surgery, he wanted to have his laptop with him because there was no server he could connect with at the time. He wanted to have his laptop with him so he could continue to do his job while he was convalescing. I think we could probably agree that that's a good employee. But the net result of this was on his way home from the Forest Service office with that laptop, he stopped by his doctor's office and his vehicle was broken into, and the laptop was stolen out of the back of his vehicle. And HR said, well, you're not supposed to ever be out of possession of your laptop if it contains personally identifiable information. Well, at this point I was becoming a leader inside the organization, and I was sitting with several other senior leaders of the organization, and I asked them at this meeting, where was their laptop? One said it was at a desk inside the Forest Service building. Another one said it was back in his hotel room. A third one said that it was locked in the trunk of his car. Well, none of those qualify as having that laptop in their direct possession. So literally all of them were in violation of that rule. So we started looking at the efficacy of the rule, which is something that we should always do in our audit processes, is look at the efficacies of the rules, regulations, policies, and procedures that we have. Another thing that emerged out of the learning review. But what did we do with this? We said, look, this rule is silly. It doesn't really work. And the only way that this would actually ever really work is if you had your laptop permanently inserted inside your body, which I think is kind of ridiculous. So what is the result? The result was we started looking at other rules that were inside the organization. And as it turns out, there is another rule that was actually posted in the elevator where this employee worked that told him how to transport his laptop home if it contained personally identifiable information. And he was in complete compliance with that rule. So we were able to save his job. But what we wanted to better understand was why it made sense to him to do what he did. This network of influences map is what emerged out of that. So I think that is all the time that I have. Back to you, Joji.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ivan. I thought that was a really poignant and thought-provoking presentation, actually. Takeaways from me are probably context is key. And again, the importance of language to unlock learning opportunities. So I think, for example, your use of influencing factors versus causal factors was really interesting. So we've now reached the end of session 3. We're going to take a short break. So this current Zoom session will be closed. So you'll need to log back in using your session 4 link. It's currently 15:22 UK time. So if you could all be ready to log back in using session 4 link by 15:40 UK time, and we'll proceed on to the last session. So thank you and see you shortly.